2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
There's desperation and anguish.
More than 80,000 Afghans have since arrived in America, but this story is still unfolding. I'm Andrea Smartin. In my new podcast, Stranger Becomes Neighbor, we'll find out what happens to these new arrivals in our communities. Who would help our newest neighbors? Follow us at kslpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen.
In today's episode of Project Recovery,
Mondays became the day where I was dealing with withdrawal. And so I would have to start drinking in the morning on Monday to get to work, to be functional. And then that was not enough. And so Monday at lunch, I would go out and I would have drinks.
make sure you listen to the end. Find us on Facebook at Project Recovery. We'll have that and much more coming up. Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, Dr. Matt,
it's about recovery.
That's right, and it's brought to you by our friends at knowyourscript.org, and they're a very wonderful website. It's a very good campaign going on right now. They started it last fall, and it's basically knowing your script when talking to the doctor, when taking your prescription, or even having that hard conversation with your young kids. And so it's very valuable, and you go check them out at knowyourscript.org. Now, Dr. Matt, I just did a kind of a Facebook Live with them last week.
Oh, yeah?
And so what they're talking about is, we know we talk a lot about opioids, but it's not just opioids. It's Xanax, it's Ritalin.
The benzodiazepines.
The Adderall.
The stimulant meds that so many kids are taking, yeah.
Because, you know, it's been a while since I've been to college, and even when I was in college, I'm not sure I was there. But a lot of the young college students are trying Adderall, trying to study for finals.
That's the generation now, is like people who, they see it as sort of this enhancement drug. Like, I don't really have a problem with attention. ADHD is a real developmental problem. But some people just want to stay up all night and study during finals, and so they'll share it with each other, or buy it, or sell it.
And then it becomes stay up all night to party.
Right. Sure.
And people are using it that way. I mean, it was crazy, because I was talking to David Wilkins from the Weber Human Services up in Ogden. He was on the podcast with us, and he was talking about how, and I don't remember the exact percentage, but the number was high, that people think that getting high on prescription drugs is a lot better than getting high on illegal drugs.
I've heard that definitely from my patients that I work with. They say, well, it's safer, right? Because, you know, it's a controlled substance and doctors prescribe it. I'm like, no, it's not safer. I mean, in some ways, maybe. But, I mean, you don't really know what you're getting off the street if you're buying something that's been cooked up by somebody in their bathtub. But, I mean, the reality is it's just as dangerous. In many ways, that attitude will lead you to use more than you should anyway, and so you're at higher risk for addiction.
You know, and I was talking to him about that, and I said, hey, maybe you wouldn't be surprised of how many people end up in this chair that I'm sitting in right now on our podcast, Project Recovery, because they started with a legal prescription.
We ought to count it up. We ought to look at what the percentage. Oh, we've been doing this a couple of years. I'll bet it's, what do you want to bet? 80%?
80%.
Yeah.
Started with that ended up using heroin or harder drugs.
Sleeping on the streets, lose it at all, but it started with a legal prescription.
And so they start that, they think they're okay, then they start abusing it, and then they find out that they can't get it anymore because restrictions have become a lot tougher.
And it's expensive to buy.
So then they end up doing something cheaper, and it's a story that's been told so many times on this podcast that I don't think we could tell it enough, because the dangers are out there. And the reality is somebody today in the state of Utah is going to go from prescription to heroin.
Many somebodies, unfortunately.
You know, and that's what this podcast is designed to do, is get this conversation out in the open. And there's going to be somebody who tries meth for the first time today that thinks, hey, this is a good idea.
They're going to be like, woo, it's a pick-me-up.
Yeah, and you want to go back and look at the history. Nobody's ever won against meth. Meth is winning every single time. Yeah. And you think at first you start, and this is going to be okay. I'm going to be able to...
Meth is undefeated.
Meth is undefeated. The only way to win is to not do it. I've seen people stop, and I guess that is a win in the win column.
That's the way you win, is either you never start, or if you've started, you stop. Other than that, you're going to lose.
Yeah, every time. So look around at all the stuff you love and hold. You know, in sobriety and in recovery, they tell you right now, why you put your sobriety up number one is because if you put anything above sobriety, that is what you're going to lose. You're going to lose your family. You're going to lose your friends. You're going to lose your house. You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose all these things if you put those above sobriety. So a lot of times people think you're selfish when you get into a sober living or a sober area because you make sobriety your number one thing. And that's hard to tell your loved ones. That's hard to tell your kids. It's hard to tell your wife. It's hard to tell your job. It's like, if I don't put sobriety number one, I'm going to lose everything I put above that.
And I think to build on that idea, though, the people that really are the most important relationships in our lives, they'll get it.
Yeah.
And they'll realize because he or she put sobriety number one, then they have time and energy for me. Like a spouse will realize because they put sobriety above everything else, they're available to be a husband or a father. You know, an employer would say because they put sobriety number one, they're available to give their all at work. You know, so the people that really count, I think they get that. It's sort of a weird concept at first because a spouse always wants to hear, I'm number one, or your kids are number one, you know.
Or even your job should be number one because your job allows you to have those other things. If you don't have a job, you don't have an income, how are you going to support the ones that you love? How are you going to be able to support yourself? So most people think, well, your job's got to be number one.
But how many tears have been shed in this studio by really good people who didn't put sobriety as number one, and they lost all those things. They loved their spouse. They loved their kids. They enjoyed their job. They were doing great, but they lost all of that because they didn't put sobriety number one.
Now, here's where it gets somewhat scary is because after you get a little bit of sobriety underneath your belt, and it still becomes a number one priority, but the real world creeps back in. So I think that's where a lot of people relapse after 2, 5, 10 years of sobriety because they think they've got this. We just had your good friend on two episodes ago, Tara, after 13 years.
Yeah, that's a long stretch of not drinking, right? 13 years is impressive, but it still crept back in her life.
And she said as soon as she took it up, it was off to the races. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm hurting myself right now because I'm not hurting myself, but I hurt my back. I hurt my back lifting.
Lifting the weights?
Yeah, and I'm really, really sore.
Yeah,
and
you look good in that shirtless, crazy, shirt picture you put on Facebook.
And that was fun.
You're getting buff, man.
I'm starting to see some stuff, but I was lifting some weight, so I pulled my back. This is only the second time I've ever pulled my back. Once I was reaching for a napkin. This time's a little cooler because I was actually lifting weights.
I don't know. I like the first one, but go ahead.
But I'm in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
I'm actually being able to walk around today, and I made myself go to the gym today because for the past 2 days, those are the first 2 days that I've missed the gym.
But you didn't work your back out today, did you?
No, I did legs.
Careful.
I did legs.
Okay.
But the only thing I'm taking is ibuprofen.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not going to lie to you. I was like, I wonder if a pain pill would. And now, my addiction wasn't pain pill. But I was like, but I wonder, but I didn't. Because I don't even want to introduce that. I don't even want to. But the thought crept into my head.
So Ashley and I had this conversation last weekend about a mutual friend of ours whose spouse is smoking weed all the time.
Uh-huh.
And that person's in recovery for alcohol. And the conversation, Ashley and I were talking about is like, well, is that smart for a person to do? If they are addicted to one substance, what do we think? Like, should they be doing that? Because the spouse, the friend of ours, she's worried about how her husband is doing. And it's like, well, my opinion, especially after doing the show, even with all the education I have, it's been more visiting with people week in and week out who've had this experience. I feel like, and I think the research backs me up, if you're an addict with one substance, you're most likely going to be an addict with other substances. You're just switching. You're just switching to a different substance, right?
And that one might be better for them. And they call that. I'm gonna mess the term up, but people are doing that now. So they go, I don't do heroin, but I do marijuana.
Well, I think you see it it's the cliche of the AA room, right? Everybody's hopped up on coffee and cigarettes.
Yeah.
And they're smoking like chimneys and realizing they were just switching addictions.
I think it's a slippery slope. I really do.
So do you feel like you could take a pain pill? And because, you're in pain. That's what pain pills are for. Or maybe a muscle relaxer. Could you do those things?
I'm not willing to tempt it.
Yeah.
Because do I think I could? Probably, but I'm not willing to
Well, I
risk
know
it.
you could, but I mean, do you think it would have a? Do you think you'd be like, oh,
I'm
that's
scared.
Yeah,
I'm scared. To be honest with you, I'm scared.
Yeah.
And I've come too far and done too good.
Because don't you think that
to
you
risk it? And here I am 2 days later, and it's getting better, and I didn't have to, so I feel okay.
Yeah.
But it was painful. Like my kids were watching me on the couch on a heating pad, going, "Dad, you're really in pain," and I go, "Yeah."
Yeah.
This sucks, and I couldn't get off the couch and I couldn't move, but I'm not willing to risk all the distance that I've come for just one pain pill. Do I think I could do one and not have a problem? Yeah, but that opens the door. Remember we had Lindsay on, what's her name? Oh, I'm thinking of our old guest. She goes, I just had to lock that whole thing behind me, and she was addicted to opioids. She goes, I just cannot even leave that door semi-open. I can't just even have it inched open.
The way our brains work is so fascinating, and I feel like here's a story I think we've heard on the show before, but one I would predict could be a problem for you or anybody in this situation you're describing. Is like if you took a pain pill, muscle relaxer, whatever, and it worked, made you feel a little bit better, and then you didn't come back to it. Don't you think down the road,
it would be easier to take it a second time.
You're have a stressful moment or things aren't going your way, don't you think your brain would go, hey, remember that pain
100%,
pill?
100%.
You handled it. Maybe you could have one more.
Yeah.
And that's our brain.
That's
just
the slippery slope.
That's that addict brain that's just, boom, I could grab that.
That's the slippery slope I'm talking about. I know I could take one pill and not go back to it. Mm-hmm. But now, the next time I hurt my back or something happens, I won't have as big a conversation as I did on the first one. And then the third time, and the fourth time, the fifth time, and by the 10th time something bad happens to me, it's almost instant.
Yeah.
Boom, done.
Just go for it. Right.
And so that's why it's not worth it to me.
I think this is sort of similar, but more severe than that conversation we had about when you had like a severe cold, right? And you were thinking, cold. I don't want to take that just because that could open that door. Like just NyQuil could do it.
Yeah, because there's alcohol in NyQuil.
Sure, and it makes you feel kind of
yeah. And and I was like, and I wanted sleep. I'd been up for 2 days.
Antihistamines, NyQuil can knock you.
So right now, I just don't feel like I don't. No,
you're just going to tough it out.
Yeah,
I think so.
And I'm walking around looking like I pooped my pants because it sucks.
I didn't even notice.
I can't even move, bro.
There's a physician, an ER doc, friend of mine. Talking to him this week, he just had a major knee surgery. He's hobbling around, And I said, "What are you taking?" And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, I know better. I'm just taking Tylenol and ibuprofen."
That's an ER doctor.
ER doctor. And this is a guy who is a, I guess you call him an extreme athlete. He is really in tune with his body and he knows what to do and what not to do. And I mean, the first thing out of his mouth was like, "Oh, I don't do that. I just Tylenol, ibuprofen." And we talked a little bit about it. And I actually asked him, "Have you ever had problems with addiction?" He's like, "No, but I see it all the time. I'm not gonna go
down
there."
that road.
Yeah.
Hey, you're listening to Project Recovery. Coming up, our guest today is Trevor Winn. He's coming up on 2 years of sobriety in March. We're going to find all about his story in just a few seconds.
It's the story of an American held in a dark Venezuelan prison.
Then all of a sudden, they all kind of lined up. They pointed their guns at me. And this is the point where I thought, I'm going to die today.
I'm Becky Bruce. I spent a year working on Hope in Darkness, which now has more than 2 million downloads. Find it on kslpodcast.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey, welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That is clinical psychologist Dr. Matt Woolley. Our guest today, Trevor Winn. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
So, Trevor, we got you as a guest on Project Recovery in kind of a unique way. Your friend had listened to our podcast. She said you've got an amazing story and reached out and said, hey, you should have Trevor on. And I was like, cool. Can you do it tomorrow? And so I reached out to you and you said yes. So first tell me about your friend. I mean, why does she think your story is so unique and so good?
That's a great question. I don't know. She's got some grandiose ideas going on. But no, her husband is a close friend of mine and we work together. And he was really part of the discovery and realization that I needed help. In a big way. and has been one of my bigger supporters as I've gone through sobriety and recovery. So,
Now, on the first segment, I said in March you're coming up on 2 years of sobriety.
Yep.
And that's huge. Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
But you also sat down before we turned the mics on and said, I don't think my story's that cool. And I said, I think that's what more people relate to is an average story. So let's start out with your story. Where does it begin?
Well, if you're starting it from, when I first started drinking, because drinking was my
let's pause. Let's push pause on that. Let's just back up. Let the listeners get to know you a little bit. Where are you from?
Okay.
Maybe a little bit about your family. Just because I think that's like Casey's saying. I agree. We've had some stories on here.
Beta fish fighting.
That's one of my all-time favorites. Let's sell tickets for beta fish fights and muscle wrestling in junior high. But we've had some outlandish stories that would make great movies of the week. But we've also had just as many sort of typical person doing good, falls into an addictive pattern. And I think that's really interesting for the people to kind of relate to. It is for me, because it's like, I think that drives home the point of addiction maybe better than the crazy stories.
Because it's the more common one that
because
really
that
happens.
tells you it could happen to anybody. Yeah. So where are you from? And just tell us a little bit about you.
So I was raised in Orem, Utah. Originally from Roosevelt, moved out here when I was pretty young, all the Utah stuff. And raised in a whole family, good family, still supportive, parents married.
A lot of siblings. It was Orem. Isn't it you have to have 8 siblings?
We only had, there's 4 of us.
Okay.
Total.
They let you slide through on that? All right.
And I'm the baby of the group. So yeah, I grew up, spent most of my formative years in Orem. Grew up in the LDS church. After high school, I did what most LDS guys do, and I went on a mission. And
where'd you go?
I went to the Philippines. Yeah.
Oh, I went to the Philippines.
Did you?
Yeah. What mission were you in?
Cebu.
Cebu, up north. I was in Naga.
Oh,
down
okay.
south.
Yeah. Nice. So I did that, and it was an excellent experience for me. And came home and got married within a year.
Is that normal?
I mean, normal in Utah County or normal?
Okay, first of all, I just realized Cebu's south.
Cebu's south, correct.
I messed that up. And yes, it's normal, Casey, to get married within 3 months if you're from Utah County.
Yeah. Just teasing.
So got married pretty quickly after that and just started I was studying psychology at the time in college. I wound up ending
because your dad's a therapist, right?
My dad's
was
a
that
therapist.
Part of the interest? Dad's a therapist.
It was. I mean, there's always, I think, when us addicts all have some type of daddy issue or something that goes on at some point. But I definitely wanted to be like my dad.
Yeah.
And then it didn't work for me. I wasn't very good at it. I worked in the field for several years, and eventually switched over to public health, and that's what I graduated in that. And of course, now I'm doing sales, right? 'Cause that's what public health majors do.
Because you want to make money and you don't want to starve to death. So sales is the place. Yeah.
But in that process of working, going to school, and being married as a kid, that first marriage didn't work out, and that was really like that's kind of my normal story up to that point, and that's where kind of things started really.
What do you think were the troubles in that first marriage?
Well, without divulging too much, I mean, I was young. I just didn't understand. I don't think she did either. We didn't understand what marriage entailed and how much work it is, and it's not about just like the romance of the passion of romance.
And whether or not you're really a good fit for each other over time, right? I mean, that's something you don't know yet at that age.
We just didn't know. And for sure, there's a lot of that. And eventually we just kind of grew apart, and there's some things that happened that a catalyst for the divorce. But in that process that we went through together, there was a point where we actually decided to leave our faith as well. And
the two of you, before you divorced, decided to quit going to church.
Yeah.
Did you start drinking then?
The moment I decided to, I did. Yeah. So there was a moment. There was a night where we just spoke together and said, "You know what? I don't think this is for us. We're not going to go down this path." We were married in the temple, for those who understand what that means. And we removed.
It means you're all in.
Yeah. We removed all of our, our garments and all that stuff, and we stopped wearing them. And then, and I went to the gas station and I bought some drinks. And I had drinks.
And for the listeners,
before.
I mean, that's not that uncommon, because alcohol specifically is very prohibited by the LDS Church. If you're an active all-in member, then you would never drink alcohol under any circumstances. And so I feel like a lot of active members of the church who grow up that way, once they feel deprived, sort of, because they kind of like, this looks fun, or it looks like, the beer commercials don't make it look unpleasant. Right. And I think a lot of people, that's one of the first things they think to do is like, well, let's see what that part of the world's all about. The rest of the world mostly, has wine or beer or drinks. And so you probably felt like, hey, let's see what this is all about.
For sure, there was a lot of that, and we had both experienced it in our teenage years. We had played around with it too.
Okay.
So it wasn't a totally foreign concept, but maybe the depravity of that was the excitement of not being tied to that restriction anymore was also part of our decision.
Right.
There.
If you're a teenager, there's probably maybe some guilt.
Yeah.
Because you had to go tell the bishop before you went on your mission, hey, I went with Casey Scott to a kegger, and he got me drunk.
I'm sure my name's been mentioned quite a few times in the bishop's
Flats.
office.
Yeah. So we went all in the other direction at that point, and then the marriage didn't last. Shocker to everybody listening, it didn't last much longer than that. And then, but the process of me deciding that I didn't want to be affiliated with the faith, because I was raised that way, and that was part of my value system, and a big part of my family's value system, and also the way I related to my family.
Sure.
It really shook me to the core. And
I think a lot of people don't understand the LDS Church is a lot more like some of the ancient religions, Catholicism, Judaism, Islam, and in the sense that it's sort of it's a sun up to sundown, all encompassing sort of lifestyle, right? And so families and friends tend to relate to each other and spend time together sort of in the context of that, whereas other faiths, that may just be a Sunday sort of weekend thing a person does, and not to denigrate that in any way. But Mormonism is sort of this all-encompassing lifestyle. So when you leave, 99% of the time, that really negatively impacts your relationships with family. At least, was that the case for you?
Yeah, I mean, and my family didn't run away from me by any means, but there was certainly walls that I put up, even, just knowing that, or feeling uncomfortable with addressing the fact that I had left and not really communicating well with them, and then feeling my own shame and guilt around that, and then trying to figure out what values I actually still kept with me from my youth. That was when I say it shook me to the core, that was really what it was, is I didn't know who I was and what I valued anymore. Mm-hmm. And for someone that in my family has alcoholism that runs through it, and I don't know how that science works, if it really you inherit it or what it is, but for someone that had a predisposition or whatever you want to call it for it, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. I don't regret my decision, but to move away from that, because it just wasn't right for me. It wasn't working, but I do have regrets around doing it so hastily and not really understanding what the repercussions would be to me emotionally. And
did you know prior to leaving the church that you had alcoholism in your family history?
I did.
Oh, you did. Okay. Yeah. And to answer sort of your question is, the science isn't perfect, but we do know that if you have alcoholism in your family or addiction in your family, you are at much higher risk. And I think studies usually 50 to 70% higher risk of developing an addiction yourself. It may not be to the same substance, right. But you're at higher risk. But most people don't know that. And so most people do just kind of they don't figure it out until it's a problem.
Yeah. It became a problem.
So here we are. You're divorced. How old are you at this time?
Oh, I was 25, 26. Yeah.
Stopped at the gas station, got some liquor.
Bud Light. It's a gas station in Utah. There's no liquor.
Yeah. So then do you go all in on the drinking, or is it just a recreational type drink?
It's pretty recreational at that point. Like I said, it was just kind of relaxing to not have the stress or the pressure of
the guilt,
the rules,
the burden,
and the guilt and all that stuff, So it was pretty casual at first, and then when I was alone in my house and I didn't have anybody after the divorce or separation, then it became more problematic, and I was drinking a lot more during that time, and I was taking Ambien and different sleeping meds on top of it, and found myself in some really weird situations in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
I think somebody ought to write a book on Ambien stories, because that medicine, holy cow.
I'll tell you what, I had a buddy, I won't mention his name, but he took Ambien, and it was to help him sleep. And then one day I said, "Hey, are you still taking that Ambien?" And he goes, "No." I go, "Why?" He goes, "The other night I woke my kids up at 4 o'clock in the morning because I'd built a fort out of the couch pillows and made them all come sleep in it." And my ex-wife told me from that, my wife made no more
We're done with Ambien.
Because it's a dangerous. And then you mix that with alcohol, that could be a deadly combination.
Yeah.
And so you're drinking because you're lonely. You're drinking because you can't sleep. Your core values have been twisted, shook, and you're trying to figure out who you are. And I can tell you right now, as being an alcoholic, alcohol is not going to help you find out who you are.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous recipe.
Yeah, that's for sure. But it allowed me kind of an avenue to not even really address those issues, right? And that's what I needed at that moment, was just the opportunity to not have to dwell on those things. Not saying it served a good purpose in the long run, but that's what I needed then. And so I took full advantage of it, and I was single for a couple years and dated around. And again, a lot of that was it was against the values that I was raised with, right?
So bars,
and then just dating around, and eventually my current wife, and we lived together before we were married, and so there was just a lot of guilt still that I didn't feel like I should have, but I had, and I hadn't really resolved that and those value systems internally, and so but my current wife and we got married about 10 years ago after dating and living together for about a year and a half. And we've been married since, and she's stuck with me through the alcoholism and the recovery process. And then a couple years into our marriage, we had a kid, and so we have one kid right now. She's 8 years old. And
did you have children from your first marriage?
We didn't, no. Yeah, so that was a blessing for sure. I think. I don't know. It seems like it, right?
Hey, it is.
Simplified it.
Simple, yeah.
So, and I don't know, the process of me really turning heavily to alcohol, I found a lot of excuses. Casey and I talked about this before. So there was my divorce, and then there was being lonely, and then there was after I met my wife, my current wife, my mom died shortly after that, and I was really close to my mom, and that was another great excuse for me, and also the loss of my closest friend. So that was an ongoing challenge. In fact, something I didn't really start to uncover until I got into treatment for my alcoholism. So.
Yeah.
But as addicts, we take advantage. Now, bad things happen to good people all the time. But when you're an addict, you see that as an advantage to take advantage of, to give you an excuse to keep up your behavior. And that's what we do. I mean, I used to, I've said on this podcast before, I would manufacture arguments. I would create scenarios that I knew would end with me drinking. And I could do them all day long, and I could do it to you, Dr. Matt. I could do it to you, Trevor. I was good at manipulating a situation to give me the freedom to feed my addiction. And that's how crazy this addiction is. So you say you're dated for 2 years, you were single, and then you met your current wife.
Yeah.
Does she drink?
She does, yeah.
And when you guys got together, drinking was probably something you did.
It was kind of the premise of us getting together in a lot of ways. Not that we didn't have other things in common, but, I mean, it was always a celebration. You know, whatever reason to get together and drink with family, and that's what we did.
That's why alcohol is such an enigma, because you drink to celebrate. You drink to commiserate. You know what I mean? It's that's why bars are so popular. Hey, something good just happened. Let's go to the bar. Hey, something bad just happened. Let's go to the bar. You know, and it's the cover everything.
It's the perfect business model.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. So you guys get together, and drinking is kind of important to you guys. I don't want to say important, but it was.
No, it was. It really was, and you know, that's been my newfound challenge, and our newfound challenge is like, who are we without that? You know, and my wife was extremely respectful during like the recovery process, and there was a time we didn't have alcohol in the house until I was comfortable. But you know, Casey and I talked about this. There was a point where I knew that I couldn't run from alcohol. Because nobody can. I mean, unless you're a total hermit and, you know, want to go
live in Morgan.
Live in Walden's Pond or Morgan.
Yeah. Because there's no alcohol there.
Right. But that's the case. You know, I mean, I've said it before. Maybe I could say it again. But I was in recovery. We're in a process group. And the guy in my group is like, I can't go down to Pioneer Park because that's where I scored my drugs. And I go, well, that's just stupid. He goes, you don't know. And I go, but I do know after this meeting, we're all going to get in the 2 vans and we're going to go to Maverick where my dealer is. And then when I get home, I'm going to have to go to Smith's to feed my kids, and that's where my dealer is. Everywhere I go, there is alcohol. So if all we've done is taught me to take a right turn where there's alcohol, I'm going to be running around in circles. So let's get to the root of the problem. Yeah. And so no alcohol in the home in the beginning.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to when you first dated. Did she ever say to you, wow, you can drink? Or what kind of drunk were you?
Good question. So there was never really a point, honestly, where she thought it was problematic, which is a different part of the story. So I wasn't the scenario where my wife's like, hey, you got to shape up or ship out. I was pretty good at hiding it. And I was, like a lot of alcoholics, I was not very good at being present with her. But it just never – when I went into treatment, and I'll tell you the story of how it happened, but it was a surprise to her that it was as bad as it was. So there was never that conversation that we had. There was some conversations that I had with her where I told her because like all alcoholics – you know, you try to quit for a couple days or a week, or you try to do sober January, and it goes until the
27th
or the 4th.
I would say 27th. That's pretty good.
Well, you pretty much achieved your goal there.
Close enough.
But there was a point where I had turned, like right before I went into recovery, a couple weeks before, I just said, "I'm dying." Every day I feel myself dying more, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. And it didn't really click, because until you're in the head of somebody, and we're so good at telling our story the way we want people to see it, and covering things up, and being perceived as however we want to be perceived, you know, and that it was a shock to her.
Before we get to your rock bottom and leading you into Wasatch Recovery, where you did your recovery, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm curious, because you said you got good at hiding it.
Yeah.
But did your friends think you had a drinking problem? Did your work, did it ever cause any kind of problem that gave people, because I want to get to this thing because you told me it off air.
Yeah.
But did anyone ever come to you and go, hey, you might have a problem?
Yeah. So my friends mostly consist of the people I work with. You know, I'm one of those types of people that has a pretty small group of friends, and I'm pretty social in a big environment, but when it really comes down to who I spend my time with, it's my family, and it's that small group of friends. And I've always found that it's easier to to make that work with people you work with, because then you're happy at work, and but there were a few instances at work where I was approached by people and just said, "Hey, are you okay?" Or is this going to be a problem? And there was an incident where we went on a work trip, and it was we have a pretty tight group of I don't know, guys that have been at the business for a little bit longer, and we went on this business trip, and it was like a celebration for I'm in the insurance world, so one of the insurance carriers, and I got pretty schnockered every night pretty much, and it was the first time where publicly I had really embarrassed myself. My wife and I got into a spat, and I was just really obnoxious, and when I came back, I was doing the apology tour,
That.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I generally just got really wasted at my house by myself, especially when my daughter was born. My public drinking took the back seat.
So much of the fact that you probably didn't even go out in public as much.
A lot, yeah. And I would go take care of my daughter, and and we'd do our thing with my family, and then when we went home, when she went to bed, that's when the bottles came out. And not to say I didn't drink other times, but that's when I would really drink myself to death. So that was the first situation where I was really embarrassed when I was on that trip, and I had to come back and do the apology tour with people at work, and people were asking me about it, and so in hindsight, I remember those conversations, but in the moment, they just I didn't even address them.
It's crazy that you say that, because I've lost a couple jobs because of alcohol. And it wasn't until I got sober and got out of there and remember people coming up to me going, "Are you okay?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, sure." You know what I mean? And what I didn't realize was they were trying to extend a hand. They were trying to ask if I needed help. But I was so into my addiction thinking that I could figure this out that I was like, "Yeah."
Thinking maybe they didn't really know.
No, I 100% didn't think they knew.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That they were like, because it's not like, "Hey, you're drinking too much." They go, "Are you okay?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, I'm great."
Well, do you think it would make a difference, either one of you guys, if people who were concerned just addressed it directly? The "Are you okay?" question's a little broad, and honestly, it hits at our manhood. Right? Like,
Are you okay?
So
I go, "No, I'm great."
The answer to almost any man when you say, "Are you okay?" is, "Yeah, I'm great. I'm better than you."
I've got a hurt back and I'll still tell you I'm okay.
Yeah, exactly. But what if they came up to you and said, are you doing okay with your drinking? Like I don't want to overstep my bounds, but I'm a little worried about you. What if they were that direct? Would that have been offensive when you were in your prime?
I don't know if it would have been offensive. I do know, though, the "Are you okay?" type of statement, it's kind of like saying hi on the street, where you really don't care what their answer is, right?
People don't even break stride.
Yeah.
When they say, "Are you okay?"
So if somebody just say, "Hey, are you okay?" Like, I'm not going to actually give you a real answer on that.
Right.
But
no, I'm not. I'm a complete raging alcoholic.
Yeah,
Do you have a couple hours? Have a seat.
Let's start a podcast.
Let me tell you what I did last night.
But I think that's what he's saying. It's like, I don't know if it would be offensive, and maybe it depends on how they ask, but I would have remembered that a lot easier than
I think
it's 2 years of sober.
I think it's better. I think if somebody really cares, and if they're just doing the hi on the street thing, then whatever. But if you really care about somebody in your life and you really think they have a problem with an addiction, in my opinion, be soft about it, but be direct. Just say, are you doing okay with your drinking? I'm worried about how you're doing. What can I do to help you? And don't keep walking. Just stop and talk to them.
I heard people after I got sober go, "We used to smell it on your breath." And I thought I was fooling everybody. I had gum in the car door. I had cologne in the center driveway. Whatever you had, I had it. You know what I mean? And then I go, "No, we smelled it on you all the time." I was like, here I thought I was getting away with the world's best kept secret.
Yeah.
And here they thought I was the world's worst hider.
Yeah.
It was just insane.
Yeah. I think Dr. Matt is spot on that too, that like, if you really just ask somebody that question, then give it time.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Because one of the things that addicts are so uncomfortable with, me particularly, is silence, right?
Sure.
My wife still makes fun of me because I'll throw in like random words whenever.
Just to keep
yeah. But if you just sit there and let somebody be uncomfortable, they'll often tell you what's going on, right? Or you'll know that they're lying and hiding something.
Well, that's a great therapist tool. I mean, honestly, I mean, I don't know if you learned that from your dad or what, but silence is a great motivator.
Oh, my therapist would just sit there and go, "Are you going to say anything?" And I go, "I don't know." And then before I knew it, I was telling him everything,
right.
And I'd be like, "Oh,
yeah."
Well,
okay.
And for someone that's trying to help, and like the person that Jessica that submitted my name for this thing, like, it shows that you care enough to actually listen to what they really have to say and are feeling.
Right.
So I think that definitely would help. And I'm not saying I wasn't presented with those opportunities and those questions in that manner, because I was. I was also presented with the other variety, which was the passerby.
Well, and that's part of being in your addiction. And I think if you're somebody who has reached out or is thinking of reaching out to a friend or family member and really offering sincere support, you can't take it personally when they say, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine," because it may take several of those conversations over a long period of time before that person's ready to hear you and listen and divulge how they're doing.
I think it's interesting. Dr. Matt just said that. Did you at any point reach out to anybody? Did you ever have an honest conversation with guys you worked with or your bosses? Or did you, like me, think that you were going to be able to figure this out, turn it around, or, solve the problem, if you will?
Well, I always thought that I could solve the problem, that for sure. But there were 3 specific incidences that I can remember that were my version of outreach. One was just me going to an AA meeting by myself and then running out the door when I realized I wasn't comfortable there.
Which is a huge step because, I used to Google AA meetings all the time. I used to try to figure out things, but I wasn't committed enough to go check a room out because I was the guy on TV. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was just kind of that was where my head was. But I can't tell you how many times I Googled AA meetings and wanted to figure out a little bit about it. But that was me trying to figure it out and reach out. But so you went to an AA meeting. What else?
So I went to an AA meeting, probably the conversation I mentioned before with my wife, where I told her I felt like I was dying every day. That was a cry for help. And then my sister had reached out to me once via text message and just said, hey, she knew I was drinking. She knew that we had, this was well past the point where I wasn't hiding that I had left the faith, and my family and I were close, and she was like a mom to my daughter and all this. But she had reached out and just said, hey, I'm worried about you drinking. Alcoholism is in our family. And I did respond to her and say, I'm worried about it too, but I played it off like a good alcoholic and just said, but I'm aware that I'm worried about it. And I played it down, but there was a part of me that was crying out at that point that was like, yeah, this is could be really out of control. There were some instances for sure.
What's interesting, Dr. Matt, is that we're listening to Trevor's story here. And just to me, it doesn't sound that bad. And I'm not downplaying his story, but to me, it doesn't sound that bad. But to you, this is horrible, right? Because so much is going on in your life, and you're trying to figure it out. You have no one to talk to. But you don't have a litany of DUIs. You don't have domestic violence charges. You don't have, all the boxes that a lot of people who have sat in that chair have checked off.
Yeah.
But it's bad for you. So that's why rock bottom is so fluid, because you're coming close to your rock bottom.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess, Trevor, and you can, correct me if you think I'm wrong, that Trevor has a really kind of deep internal world and keeps a lot of things inside and close to the vest. And that would include emotions, even maybe thoughts and feelings. Instead of being an extrovert, you're more of an introvert. And so it made sort of sense that you acted in instead of acted out. Like the things that you just rattled off are the typical acting out things of an addict. And you're right, they're extremely common and they usually precede the fall, right? But I think for you were going to your wife and saying, that's pretty powerful. I feel like I'm dying every day inside. That's a powerful, I could see the emotion still on your face when you're remembering saying that to her. And then to have her not really be on that same page. She wasn't seeing it. She wasn't. And so that just tells me that as a style, as a personality trait, a lot of what goes on with Trevor happens deep inside. And so it sort of makes sense in that context that people they sort of knew, but they didn't really know the depth of what was going on because there weren't the DUIs and there weren't the acting out behaviors other than maybe a little bit on that trip. But I bet even then the apologies you were making were not for the word. You weren't swinging on the chandelier or anything like that, right? So, I mean, I bet it was sort of like I'm embarrassed because I was sloppy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was obnoxious. And
I don't know if that comes with – I did have such a normal childhood, I think. Like, I played sports. I graduated from college. I have a good job. I have a lot of friends. Like, I don't know if, you want to call that whatever high achieving, but if you look at the rest of the world, it is relatively high achieving. So, I don't know. I had set that bar for disaster and rock bottom based off what I saw everybody else's rock bottom was. And so I kept thinking that I was fine for a long time, and I just kept piling, layers of camouflage over it so that because it was like, but this guy, this guy's got
the TV got a DUI.
Yeah, have you? Right.
You seen his mugshot?
Well, we had a guy on here that said that he came on and
that's right.
He goes, when you got your DUI, I was drinking a beer clowning you. And now here I am in your seat talking to you, and I want to say I'm sorry. But I understand that because that's why your story is so powerful. Because you didn't have any of those bad things happen, but you were still an addict, and you were hiding it, and you were lonely, and you were bandaging stuff, and you were doing all these things. So when does your rock bottom come?
So I got to the point in my drinking where, I did you guys have heard this story before, but it's like, you're a weekend drinker at first, right? Mm-hmm. And then the weekends turned into, Thursday, you start on Thursday. And then
Cinco de Mayo's on Tuesday.
Cinco de Mayo's on Tuesday.
So that's a legal holiday.
Yeah.
St. Patrick's is on a Thursday.
I now celebrate every religion and culture.
But we're joking about it, but as an alcoholic, that's what you do.
Wednesday's hump day.
Yeah.
Wednesday's hump day.
That happens every week.
And why do you think bars have themes on nights? Mondays, this is karaoke night. Well, I love karaoke. And Wednesday is wing night. I love wings. Right.
Why don't they have them all on the same night?
You can't have wings without a beer.
Yeah.
Right? And then Mondays became the day where I was dealing with withdrawal eventually. And so I would have to start drinking in the morning on Monday to get to work, to be functional. And then that was not enough. And so Monday at lunch I would go out and I would have drinks. And there were a few instances where the withdrawals became pretty severe, the DTs, and I was trying to sign a contract in the lobby of my work with a new client, who you're always trying to impress new clients. And when I went to pick up the pen, my hand just flipped up and the pen went like behind me over my head. Wow. And I was really embarrassed. And then a similar situation happened with another client where now my clients can see that I've got a problem, right? And so it started to get worse, and I started to try to treat those symptoms more aggressively with alcohol. And then,
how much do you think you were drinking over a weekend? I'm just curious. Like what did you drink and how much? Because to get to that point where you're drinking Monday morning and you can't hold a pen in your hand anymore, even under the most important circumstance to make a good impression, you must have been drinking a lot.
Yeah, so my regime, I could probably tell you to the ounce, because that's how we think in that mind frame. But I would buy, because I was being, cost effective.
Got to buy in bulk.
Yeah, and I would buy boxed wine, which is because I'm super fancy. I'd buy boxed wine, the big box,
yeah,
and then I'd buy a 12-pack of IPAs, which were simply because I didn't, I wanted to pretend like I was a hipster and I liked IPAs because they were good, but it was really just had 100% to do with alcohol content.
That
higher alcohol content. So I would drink the boxed wine over a week, the box of wine. I would drink the IPAs, and then I would have a rotating pack of Bud Light or whatever, in the fridge. So that would just go throughout the day. At least that, and then I would sneak. I could get away with doing that and not raising a red flag with my wife, really. But I would also buy usually some liquor when I went to the liquor store, a small bottle, and I'd hide it, and then I would drink that over the weekend as well. Just
a little shot for this, a little shot for that.
Accelerate the process,
Jumpstart it.
Yeah. So it was like that for quite a while.
That's a lot. That's a lot of alcohol.
Yeah. And the wine was weaning off of the liquor from before, right? So there was a different volume when it came to liquor but that was where it was at the end. And so that speaking to the volumes, that was it. So.
Yeah.
So you're signing. You can't sign contracts. Your clients are starting to notice. You've talked to your wife and said, "Hey, I'm dying every day." When we were off air, you said the scariest moment was for you was when everybody saw who you really were. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Sorry, I get a little emotional about this one. So it was one of those Mondays at work. And I had gone out to the bar. I already had, I'd get a big cup of wine. And I'd drink it in the parking lot when I got to work. Because then I wasn't drinking and driving. And then I went out to the bar at lunch. And I think I might have wound up at 2 bars. I don't remember. And I came back and it was bad. And some of the guys at work saw me walking in. And I could barely stand straight, and I just went in and sat at my desk, and they came in and confronted me and was like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I just played it off, and from what they tell me, I was kind of unruly and yelled and was kind of rude to them, which, these are my friends, right? And then I heard one of them call me into his office, and I knew, like, okay, they really know. There's no hiding it at this point. He says, "Hey, you need to come into my office. We need to talk, man." And this wasn't like you're being reprimanded at work. This was like a friend saying this. And I said, okay. And then I ran out to my truck. And I went to get in my truck and drive off. And it wouldn't start for whatever reason. And I sat in there trying to start it. And I saw 2 of them just walking out to my truck, and they opened the door, and they're like, "Dude, you need help, man." And in the process, Ryan, the owner, he had arranged treatment at Wasatch. He'd made calls. And he's like, "Dude, we're going to..." It's like, we're going to take care of you. Don't worry. You're part of the family. Your job will be here when you come back, but you got to get help. And so we sat in the conference room until everybody left. And then they drove me out to detox. But before that, he'd called my wife and told her. My wife and daughter came up, and I said my wife was surprised. She didn't realize how bad it was. My daughter didn't really understand what was going on. I'm just daddy to her. And I said goodbye. And then went into detox, and those 3 of them from my work, those guys, just sat with me in detox that first night. We talked and shot the bull. And that was, but it was, Casey, what we were talking about was when I knew they knew. That was what rock bottom was for me. It wasn't DUIs, or it wasn't my wife leaving me, or it was people being able to see what Dr. Matt was talking about, what was going on inside of me a little bit. And that was rock bottom for me. So as terrible as that moment was, it was also the moment where the switch flipped for me, you know. And obviously there's a slew of steps that had to happen after that. But it flipped that switch for me. And probably the way that those guys approached it was a big part of that, you know, just as friends, like, we're here for you. They did everything they could to make it work and help me, you know, get the help I needed.
It sounds like the most loving intervention I've ever heard, to be honest with you. I mean, it was, it didn't seem like any judgment, no name calling, no finger pointing. It was like, bro, you just need some help, and we're your family, and we're going to do what we can to get you that help. But the other side of that coin is you had to want to accept it.
Yeah.
You know, and it sounds like as horrible it was for them to see you who you would become, it had to be a somewhat freeing to admit it. You know, because you thought, just like I did, you thought you were fooling everybody. You'd gotten so good at it.
It was very, and I did say to him that moment. They asked me this later, if I remembered it, because who knows what you remember in those moments, right? But I said to him, and I do remember saying it. I said it on purpose. I've been wanting this for a long time. I just didn't know how to get there. I had one of the other people I reached out to as an old friend from my mission. He's a lawyer now. And I had texted him one night when I was drunk, and I was like, I need to talk to you. Because my intention was to find out, like, can I get help, and can I have a job? And, like, how does that work? I never followed through with it, because then when I sobered up, I realized that I'd have to be honest with him. But, yeah, it was really freeing. Once I knew that I was safe, then it just everything just kind of released, and all the pressure. And, and aside from the grueling process, I mean, there hasn't been a lot of looking back from that moment. You know, there's those moments in your life. You know, the Greek, they keep time off like actual linear time, and then like defining moments, and that was it. Mm-hmm. If not the most defining moment in my life. And I would say it's the birth of my daughter, but that wouldn't really mean anything to me if I would have kept going down that path.
Right.
So that was probably the most defining moment.
But as an average person listening to this podcast and going through something similar as Trevor, I mean, I did the same thing. When I came back to KSL, right out of rehab, they said, had you told us, you'd still have your job. I said, but how do you go to your employer and tell them you think you're broken? Yeah. And think that they're still going to see value in you and want you a part of the company. Now, KSL's been good to me. They've given me this podcast and letting me do these things. But that is a real dilemma, especially being the breadwinner of your family and the provider, and to be caught in this chaos and not knowing how to get out of it. When you said that, that's exactly how I felt. For the longest time, I knew I needed help, but I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to ask. I didn't know what was going to happen with what I've done, you know? And so for your friends to almost give you this pass, and your boss, Ryan, to go, listen, your job's safe. We want you here, but we want you better. So go do this, and then you can come back and do this. I mean, that's got to free you up and go, bring on the knowledge, bring on the recovery, because I'm ready for it.
Yeah, that was, you said that, I mean, my life couldn't have changed more in that moment, and that was an enormous part of it. And I don't know if I've thought about this, like, because I think about how my story can help somebody else, or even somebody that has a family member that's going through what I was going through. I don't know that my family could have made that impact on me, honestly. I don't know if they not made that impact, but could have helped me turn that corner. Like, because I hear from a lot of families, and people approach me now that I'm in recovery for 2 years, whatever, like, what do I do? My family member, this is happening. And, like, it can't always come from your family, I don't think, you know. And the family will always, it's good to have a supportive family, and and I think we should always try as family members, but sometimes the person that can help you the most is not going to be within your family, for whatever reason. And for me, that was the case. And I don't know if it's you can't be a prophet in your own town type of thing, but like parents, we try to control situations and our kids, and we fail inevitably.
Well, I think, and you can tell me if you think this applies to you, I think a lot of times we have a certain type of relationship with our family, and it's maybe hard to really open up to our family sometimes because we're trying to be our best self, and we have a certain persona in the relationship with our family of origin or the family that we create. But with a friend, a really good friend, maybe, I think a lot of times we can be more authentic and vulnerable in some ways because maybe we're not trying to keep up that I wouldn't say facade because it's not fake, but just we're trying to keep up that best self-image with our family, and we maybe worry about judgment with family, whereas with friends maybe we know we're not going to be judged. So
there's also, like, I know because my family had these talks with me, and they tried, but there's emotional baggage that preceded it, that where I say, like, how dare you judge me? I know your secrets too. And you know what I mean? If you want to sit here and tell me how much better you are than me, okay, let's get out the book.
Well, and then you got 40 years of like, you did this and I did that, and
but the thing from a stranger or a friend, they don't have any vested interest. I know my parents would tell me things and go, "You're just telling me this because you have to. You're my family." Right. You know what I mean? Right. You have to do this. I mean, this is what you signed up for. We're family. Right. But when a friend comes up and goes, "Hey, look,"
that friend could just leave and go home to their family.
Yeah. Whatever you're going to do, you're going to do, and it's not going to affect my family and my job by any means. Mm-hmm. So I'm just telling you this because I care and I love you. Mm-hmm. That you need some help.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually was listening to something this morning that kind of, I feel like, explains a little of this to me. Because I do think, like, not to be cliche, but love, like, changes so much for people, right? And I know we hear that, and it's like, well, what does that mean? And I've always just kind of brushed that off. But I did definitely feel like these guys loved me, in that moment. And I was listening to a book. It's an old psychologist.
Freud?
That's a nighttime listen. Scott Peck, I think is his name. The Road Less Traveled or something.
Right.
But he was saying how, like, real love is not the perception of feeling love. Real love is rooted in the absence of feeling loved. And in that moment, I had such a void of that in my life. And the stuff I get from my family is constant, right? Like, and a lot of that is, honestly, it's perception of love. Like, because you perceive it because it's expected because of the entanglement of family, right? But with these individuals, there was no entanglement. They didn't need to feel that way. And in that, when that void occurred and then they came in, it just like, oh, okay, that's what this is. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of what sparked the change for me. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And I think that's why those types of relationships outside of our family can be uniquely powerful at important moments in our life.
Yeah. And I don't want to discourage. I hope this doesn't come off like I'm discouraging family members.
I feel like you're anti-family.
Yeah.
No, but I think it hits home that there's a lot of interventions that happen because family, and they worked and they were successful. But this podcast is designed to let you know that there's so many different ways up Sober Mountain, and there's not a one-size-fits-all. And so by you sharing your story, it lets people know. And my takeaway from this is when you ask somebody how they're doing, listen. Actually ask them how they're doing. Don't do it in a passerby just to appease yourself.
Don't ask if you don't have time to listen.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah. Because that's really the truth, is are you really curious, or are you just doing that to make yourself feel good? So if something goes down, you go, well, I asked him how he's doing. He told me fine.
Check that box.
And I think sometimes there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
So out of a detox, you end up at Wasatch Recovery.
Yeah.
How long do you spend there?
So I was in detox for, I think, 4 days, and then Wasatch for 30. And then I went into their because I still had my job when I got out. I went into their intensive outpatient program and was just there every day of the week, after work. I was working. So, but that inpatient thing was, the inpatient 30-day process was really, a lot of it was just me letting the fog clear from my mind and being able to, like you and I talked about, Casey, like just get kind of the Control-Alt-Delete was the term you used, just to kind of reset my physical body and my mind, and then
a safe space to do it where you don't have the stress of living with your wife and your kids and the everyday life coming at you. That time is so important just to work on you. I tell people all the time, if you get a chance to go to 30 days in recovery without an addiction, take it.
Yeah.
Because, there is something okay about that. Think about it. Yeah. They tell you where to go. They tell you what to do. You get to talk to a therapist. You get good food.
It's the only time in my adult life where my only worry was me.
Yep.
And I'd say only time, like, as a person, we don't even usually take 5 minutes in a day to not only worry about ourselves, unless you're into meditation or,
And I do, and Matt does.
Yeah, yeah.
But you bring up such an important point that as adults, we're so consumed with taking care of others and meeting our obligations that the person that suffers always is the self. Like, we don't spend time, really on ourselves. Even a person going to the gym, there's more to it than that, and I couldn't agree with you more that I wish, honestly, if I had my way, I'll call Joe Biden, see what he thinks. If I had my way, Joe and I would have a conversation about how corporations would provide, like, maybe it's once a year, maybe it's every other year, a month of retreat, a health retreat for a person where you go get healthy. It's about fitness and nutrition and rest and learning skills and mindfulness and meditation. Like, how different would our world be if every adult took a month once a year, or maybe that's unrealistic, maybe every other year, to be able to do that. Yeah. But then again, I worry about my taxes going up. So I don't know. We'll see. But
we don't want to turn this into a political rant. But what are you doing now to stay sober? Because I think a lot of people want to know that.
Yeah.
For me, doing this podcast is a great way for me to give back to the recovery community who's given me so much. And talking with people on Facebook and like you, people who I've never thought were in the recovery world have now come up to me and said, hey, I'm in recovery and want to talk. And so I build those relationships. So what are you doing to stay sober?
Well, the first thing for me was just completing the program. Because I mentioned to you earlier in our conversation, it was really, I don't know if the program that I went to was magical. It was magical for me, but I don't know if it's because I just actually, for the first time in a long time, stuck to a program and finished it.
That's what made it magical. You made it magical.
Yeah. So thank you.
We rode the elevator up today, and I said, I remember when I got out of recovery, Pinnacle, and my goal was 1 year. And then I got to the year, and it came a lot quicker than I thought it was going to. And I remember this old crap moment going, okay, I made it a year. Because I wasn't really sure I was going to make it a year. And now I've got 2 years, and I'm going up on my third year. And, that's where I relate to the 12-step program is another 24, another week, another this. And I just keep setting the goal out further. And when I get that goal, okay, then we move it out. You know what I mean? But I do it in bite-sized chunks that I know I can eat, that I know that I'm okay with. And that's how I plan on getting to the finish line.
Yeah.
So you're doing that?
So I completed the program was a big thing for me. And then understanding and really taking in that, like, I don't have to put a timeline on this thing called sobriety, right? Meaning, is it for an eternity? I don't know. All I know right now is it is crucial for me right now. Because before, when I was trying to quit the numerous times, if you think of an eternity without alcohol or whatever your addiction is,
it's so hard.
It's impossible.
It's overwhelming and discouraging.
You cannot fathom it, yeah. So when I was taught that and then could understand that, I have to just keep reminding myself of that. And then I do have, like, I stayed in the program long enough that we do have like a support group that meets weekly. It's kind of like an AA meeting, but not really. And I attend that about every other week.
And it's cool. He was telling me about this, Dr. Matt. So they do it on Zoom right now because of COVID. And so you have to be a graduate of the program to be in the group. And they also provide a free therapist who just sits in there just in case anything.
Something, yeah, if somebody pops, you know.
Yeah.
Or like,
Needs some support, yeah.
Or we say, one of us, I mean, if you've been in these meetings enough to know that recovering addicts will say some stupid things once in a while. So every once in a while, keep us in check. But it's a pretty let your guard down, open, say what you want type of environment.
It's like an extended warranty for your car.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Except for
why wouldn't you get
They
that?
don't call you from different numbers every day to buy it.
It's not that underbody spray garbage, is it?
So I do that, and that is I don't spend a lot of time with those individuals, but I keep that as it's almost a fallout plan. Because I have my family, I have my support group, the guys I work with, and they're honestly enough for me. But I don't ever know what's going to happen. Maybe there's a global pandemic.
Crazier things have happened.
I like having that right now for me as a safety blanket. And then my next biggest thing is, from a self-care standpoint, I exercise, right? And I found a home in a boxing gym. And I box almost daily. I've never boxed before. I was terrified of fighting growing up. I was a weightlifter. I was really strong. And all that was – I did all that just so people would never fight me. So I looked scary. So
you're facing a fear.
Yeah, I was facing a fear for sure, 100%. And that was actually my motivation. The reason I did this, when Jessica called me that submitted my name, she said, "Are you sure you want to do it?" And I said, "No, I'm not. That's why I'm going to do it." Because that's something I learned.
I love that.
In treatments, I have to try to do stuff when it makes me uncomfortable. I see it, then I want to do it. And boxing was one of those things for me too. I never wanted to get hit. I was getting trained by these women that were in better shape than me and that could kill me, you know, in a fight. It was super uncomfortable. I was the gym weightlifter guy, you know. I was comfortable in that zone. So I found a home there, and I do that as frequently as I can.
How's your relationship with your wife?
So we are developing it. It's started new, honestly. I mean, so we're working on it. It's good right now, and we've put work in. It wasn't like I didn't come out of therapy and the red carpet, or out of treatment and the red carpet like was rolled out and then everything was great. We're working on it, and it's a work in progress. We do marriage counseling to try to reorient ourselves, learn new activities, learn new communication. I mean, when we drink together, couples that drink together, I don't know if this is how most couples that drink together do, but like once you started drinking, well, at first you could talk a bunch and communicate, and then as the drinks go on the night, you just shut down, right? And so we didn't really have a lot of real conversations in that process, and so that's what this has been in the last several months or year.
Well, and you had said drinking was an activity that sort of brought you together.
Right.
And so when drinking goes away, it makes sense that there's sort of this void, and perhaps the connection is damaged a little bit because it wasn't a real connection completely.
Right.
And so you're doing the right thing by rediscovering, you know, the relationship. And I think that's a perfect application for regular marriage counseling, is learning how to make that connection.
Yeah.
Well, we want to say thank you for stopping by today and sharing your story. And you are fighting addiction, and right now you're winning, man. And you're doing things that are tough, and your story is going to help so many people out there. So we appreciate you stopping by and sharing your story.
Thanks, man. It's good to meet you.
I'd like to just jump in real quick and say, you know, in the hero's journey, which we've talked about a lot, kind of that journey of mythology and story, in the hero's journey, the hero always has a loyal friend. That's one of the archetypes that follows the hero along. And I got tearful and emotional listening to you talk about your friends. And I hope that's the takeaway amongst other things that people take, is we never can make it through our own hero's journey in life without those loyal friends. And I think that's a powerful part of your story. And so I hope your friends listen to this. I want to tell them thank you for being such good friends. And I think if you're out there right now listening to this show, look for opportunities to be that loyal friend, because somebody needs you.
That's right. The opposite of addiction is connection. You've been listening to Project Recovery, a KSL podcast.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.
2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
There's desperation and anguish.
More than 80,000 Afghans have since arrived in America, but this story is still unfolding. I'm Andrea Smartin. In my new podcast, Stranger Becomes Neighbor, we'll find out what happens to these new arrivals in our communities. Who would help our newest neighbors? Follow us at kslpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen.